Welcome, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, to the new Black Media. Today's broadcast is about the criminal justice reform that turns to a list of problem officers. This is an interesting situation where they are trying to show the criminal justice system transparency. So, pictured here is Sean Ellis. He poses for a photo at the law office of his attorney, Rosemary Scapiccio in Boston. During the 22 years he spent in prison after being convicted of killing a Boston police detective, Sean Ellis believed there was something suspicious about the officers who led the murder investigation. He just couldn't prove it. It would take years of digging and scores of public information requests from his attorneys to uncover evidence that several officers investigating the 1993 murder case were involved in criminal activity, information that wasn't shared with the defense. A Superior Court judge in 2015 ordered a new trial for Ellis, and his murder charges were later dismissed. Defense attorneys have long run up against a brick wall when trying to discover whether an officer has credibility issues that could set their client free. But the case of Ellis, and more recently, Philadelphia rapper Meek Mill, born Robert Williams, is fueling calls among civil liberty groups and reform-minded district attorneys to make the system more transparent. It is part of a larger call to address criminal justice reform at a time of growing anger over police shootings and wrongful convictions, often involving African Americans. 5 years after protests that erupted in Ferguson, Missouri over the fatal shooting of unarmed teenager Michael Brown, activists have been pushing prosecutors to create lists of problem police officers, limit the use of officers on them, and review cases these officers worked to determine whether cases should be dropped or if defendants should be exonerated. Quote, in addition to charges, this is the other thing that prosecutors can be doing, making it very hard for officers to engage in the kind of conduct that should lead to them being fired, unquote, said Scott Roberts, the senior director of criminal justice campaigns for Color of Change, an online racial justice organization, which is calling for prosecutors nationwide to create lists. Well, family, I'm going to stop right there for a second, and I'm going to put that onus on ADOS. I'm going to put that onus on black people in particular. Black, traditional, foundational black Americans, we should have had this done a long time ago. The fact that we're just waking up, we should be looking into this, and fast. So the Supreme Court ruled that prosecutors have a constitutional responsibility to share information favorable to the defense, including law enforcement officers with credibility issues. It is often called the Brady Rule. As you can see, the Brady Rule's legal definition. I'll let you take a minute to pause and read it for yourself. Wrongdoings that can land an officer on a so-called Brady list or database, including lying on a police report, and in a court of law is called testifying. That term was revealed by our late brother Johnny Cochran. That was in one of his books, A Journey to Justice. It's a book that I read, and I would highly recommend it. He revealed that information there. But nonetheless, a database including lying on a police report or in a court of law, excessive force, bigoted comments, or crimes such as drunken driving or domestic violence. Some lists also include officers under investigation, though they could be removed if the allegation is dismissed. Others have expanded the list to include lab technicians and others who might testify on government's behalf. And let me tell you, we have exposed in the past where lab technicians were doing foul play in the lab, where they were changing the test results to make certain defendants guilty of crimes that they were not guilty of. So I can understand why they want to expand this list to include those lab technicians and others who might testify on the government's behalf. Again, black people, this is something, a list that we should be coming up with, whether they do it or not. But I continue. With no clear guidance from the courts on how that information should be shared, critics have chided prosecutors for failing to keep track of problem officers and going out of their way to keep information from the defense, either by failing to disclose the details about the officer, or choosing not to put the officer on the stand, or dropping a case altogether. Do you hear this, family, how they do? And yet they have so many black people behind bars. And it's behind this crooked racial system that I told you I can't even fix my lips to call it a justice system. It's just not that. But nonetheless, they say criminal justice advocates said the Brady Rule violations have long been a problem and continue to pose a risk to innocent defendants. Quote, "It's a serious problem," said Samuel Gross, the founder and senior editor of National Registry of Exonerations, which has tracked 2,472 exonerations, mostly due to Brady violations. Quote, "We know from repeated scandals that there are a substantial number of officers who have engaged in concerted patterns of abuse and done dreadful things," unquote. In July, no, I'm going to skip this part. It's about Meek Mill, and I'm going to go past that because that's, while it's all important, I need to get to the other part of this. Quote, "It is a position of public trust, and people who are on that force may be called as witnesses in criminal matters. It simply doesn't make sense for the public to fund people who are incapable of doing the work," unquote. Quote, "People want fairness and justice for all," Gardner said. "No one wants to pick and choose when an officer decides to be credible. What is at stake is the whole criminal justice system." St. Louis Circuit Attorney Kimberly Gardner formalized an exclusion list with 58 names, including 24 officers found to have written racist social media posts. Her office has also dismissed about 100 cases involving officers with credibility issues and ruled officers on the list may not be allowed to testify at trials or submit a case at her office. Quote, every witness's bias and credibility can be tested, and police officers are no exception," she said. "The idea is that the law is applied equally to everyone." Police unions have responded to the list with lawsuits and lobbying to prevent the release of names or limit their use by prosecutors. Lo and behold, they want to make sure that they hide their rogue and real foul bad cops, the ones who make the rest of the cops look bad themselves. Quote, "It's unfair and improper to arbitrarily add officers to this list without some fair and balanced protocol," John McNesby, president of the Philadelphia Police Union, said. "It's damaging to officers' reputations and livelihood." Well, I say to that, forget their livelihood and forget their reputation when you have a justice system that is so unequal and so unbalanced and so unfair and allows your officers to kill unarmed people and not be held accountable. I say to your words, they fall on empty ears. Well, Lastly, quote, I knew this wasn't right. No, Ellis said he believes he wouldn't have gone on trial if his defense team had known about the officers, several of whom pleaded guilty to federal conspiracy, civil rights, and tax violations. Judge Carol Ball concluded that Ellis's arrest was a rush to judgment based on an inadequate police investigation. Well, he might have gone to college or been able to attend his father's funeral. He wouldn't have been with his mother. He would have been with his mother as she battled cancer. Instead, he was denied a request to go to his dad's funeral. Quote, it's like I lost my life, Ellis said. I went in as a teenager and here I am getting out as a 41-year-old. I don't believe what happened to me happens in a vacuum. I believe it's commonplace. It's the way the system works. Family, this so-called justice system has never been that. That's why I've referred to it so many times as a racial system, because it's just based on race. It's a racist system. And the dominant society refuses to acknowledge the truth of the matter. The numbers speak for themselves, so the trolls can save it. Anyways, you tell me what you think. I feel bad that this Mr. Ellis went in as a teenager and coming out as a 41-year-old man behind a system that is so screwed up that it has caged more than too many of people who are probably innocent and don't belong there, while we have a society full of people who should be locked up already. They should have been locked up yesterday, but instead, because they have a different complexion, they get a slap on the wrist and they get a chance to stay out and try again, try another day. All based on race. All based on skin color. This is the New Black Media. Thanks for joining. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on another video. Thanks for watching. Peace out.